Welcome to the exam preparation for AZ-500, Microsoft Azure Security Technologies. My name is Peter Ditender, and I'm a Microsoft Technical Trainer. In this video series, we will guide you through the essential strategies for taking the AZ-500 exam. Our focus is on exam strategy and preparation. We're not teaching concepts. We will cover the objectives, best practices, tips and tricks, and key points of the exam. This video will also include a lot of visual information for reference. Remember, you can pause the video at any time to review the content. This exam is designed for those who are familiar with at least 6 months of implementing technology that addresses regulatory requirements, foundational knowledge of overall Microsoft security and compliance technologies, and basic knowledge of identity and access management concepts. While optional, I would recommend you to also look into 2 fundamental level certifications as a good starting point towards AZ-500 exam, being the AZ-900, Microsoft Security, Compliance and Identity Fundamentals, or the AZ-900, Microsoft Azure Fundamentals, since they really provide that foundation on Azure as well as security. Your path to becoming an Azure Security Engineer Associate involves several steps. This video series is your comprehensive guide to exam preparation, covering essential topics and providing valuable study resources. Apart from this exam prep video series, I heavily recommend you to also use labs, study guides, and practice tests, as well as focusing on the skills highlighted during the exam prep series to ensure you're well prepared. Once you feel confident in your understanding of the content, it's time to take the exam. So with that, let's get started. This exam prep video series will help you with 3 key things: identifying what will be covered on the exam, gaining insights into preparing for the exam, and determine which concepts to prioritize or revisit for your own further study. Keep in mind, this series is not a replacement for official Microsoft training, whether instructor-led or self-paced, or a substitute for hands-on experience. While it will guide you on what to expect in the exam, it won't teach the topics in detail. Use it to spot any knowledge gaps and focus on your time and resources accordingly. In this series, each episode will cover one of the 4 groups in the exam objective domains. For AZ-500, these groups are securing identity and access, representing about 15 to 20% of the exam questions. Next, securing networking, valid for about 20 to 25% of the exam questions. Third is securing compute, storage, and databases, having a weight of 20 to 25% of the exam questions. And last, it's securing Azure using Defender for Cloud and Sentinel, which represents the largest weight of 30 to 35%. So important to emphasize is that each group has a specific weight, indicating the percentage of questions that will come from each area. While Group 4 has the largest weight, in order to pass the exam, you need to be familiar with skills in each of the 4 groups. With that, let's dive into the content of episode 1, which focuses on secure identity and access. In this episode, we will cover how to manage security controls for identity and access, followed by managing intra-application access. So let's start with security identity and access. Here is a list of all the different skills you may be tested on. These are sometimes referred to as may include, meaning they may or may not be on your exam. This list isn't exhaustive, and while we won't be covering each and every skill in this video, be sure you are able to perform these skills before taking the exam. Remember, you can snap a screenshot or pause the video to make sure you have all the details listed on this slide. When you think about what it takes to properly secure identity and access in your organization, you might not always know where to start or know how to achieve ultimate security. That's where you should become familiar with the MCSB or Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark controls. You can find all details about this at ak.ms/MCSB. Just highlighting two examples here is identity management on one side, mainly covering controls to establish secure access to systems and applications, such as strong authentication, multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and identity monitoring. And privileged access on the other side, which covers controls to protect privileged access. Think of Azure role-based access controls, but also privileged access workstations. Talking about Azure RBAC as an example of privileged access from the previous slide, here we're looking at the high-level steps on how to assign Azure built-in roles. For the exam, you should be familiar with these steps. What is the right sequence, and how to implement the assignments using different ways, starting from the portal, Azure CLI or PowerShell, as well as using REST API calls. Obviously, when we ask you to know how to define and assign Azure built-in roles, it shouldn't be surprising to also see questions on the exam regarding custom roles. Keep in mind there is a difference on how to manage custom Azure roles and customer Entra ID roles. The process also means you start with the creation of the role, followed by assigning it to a user, a group, or a service principal as the next step. Still in the topic of identity and access, it's also important to know how to implement Entra ID tenant-level permissions, as well as being familiar with the data collection settings. What this actually means is that after enabling the correct Entra permissions management in your organization, you can connect to other platforms such as AWS, GCP, and obviously Azure. Managing identity and access means enabling privileged identity management, or PIM. This slide highlights the different tasks to go through as part of your PIM planning cycle. Make sure you are familiar with the different tasks, but also the order in which those tasks are typically performed. We briefly mentioned MFA or multi-factor authentication as one of the best security mechanisms for identity and access management. This slide here reminds you about the 3 tasks to implement. Enabling Entra ID MFA by using conditional access policies. Defining the specific conditions you want to use to prompt for MFA. And then last, testing before doing a larger rollout. Apart from MFA, conditional access obviously has a lot of other capabilities to protect identity and access in your organization. Since it's so powerful, make sure you don't just go crazy on enabling all possible settings and features, but really using a proper planning approach. Now, what this means is that conditional access brings signals together, allowing you to make proper decisions and, based on that, enforcing organizational policies. That's why we say that identity management is the new control plane. And conditional access is at the core of this. With that, let's shift to another aspect of identity management, this time talking about enterprise apps and how to assign user access, which will be covered over the next couple of slides. From a high-level perspective here, understand the difference between individual and group-based assignments, as well as the option to require user assignment for a specific app. You need to know what the Entra ID My Apps use case is covering. An interesting outsider is what is listed here on the right-hand side, access to M365 and other Microsoft paid applications. Why, instead of relying on enterprise apps assignments, access is granted based on license assignment. And also understand the difference between user and administrator consent, and how this impacts user access to published applications. As you can imagine, the exam will most probably test you on how to actually create an app registration. Apart from the steps on how to do this, understand the zero trust concept of least privilege, which in this case means you should have at least the Cloud Application Administrator role to perform this task, but nothing more elevated. Now, talking about permissions, Not only you as the administrator requires the correct permissions, you should also specify the correct permission scopes to your users. Are users coming in from a single tenant or multiple tenants? Do you allow Entra ID users only or also other cloud credentials, such as Google, Facebook, or Twitter accounts and alike? And also, do you need secrets or credentials to make your application work? Some applications run without a signed-in user, for example, services or daemon processes. This is where application permissions come in scope. Know about admin restricted and admin consent settings, which you can use to proactively request an administrator to grant the correct permissions on behalf of the entire tenant. Which brings me to the last part in this session, covering the difference between service principals and managed identities. Service principals are Entra ID objects, which are managed from the Enterprise Apps section in the Azure portal. Make sure you understand the 3 different types of service principals, and also have a look at the Microsoft Graph schema for them. Managed identities are quite similar to service principals, for as far as they are also Entra ID identity objects. You would use managed identities for Azure resources and specify the correct RBAC permissions to allow those resources to communicate with each other. For example, allowing an Azure App Service to connect to an Azure Storage account or connect to Azure Key Vault. Making sure you define the correct, again least privilege, level of access they need to support the workload scenario. This brings me to the end of this first session in this AZ-500 Exam Prep series, where we focused on securing identity and access. More specifically, how to manage security controls, as well as manage Microsoft Entra ID application access. Thank you for watching episode 1 of AZ-500 Exam Prep. Remember, this covered about 15 to 20% of the exam questions. Allow me to invite you to join me in episode 2, where we will discuss exam objective 2, secure networking.